Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Ladd, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre.
Hello, it's Peter here, and welcome to episode 186 of the Health Oddity podcast with Mr. Paul Mcllroy. This is a continuation of last week's episode, so please enjoy.
So with regards to day two, Pillars of Power, only because you've just been talking about more like, old school weightlifting, powerlifting, Eddie and deadlifts and squats and good mornings and things like that. So Pillars of Power on day two is all about kind of the strength of the legs, basically, in the lower body. Yeah. So what are you going to kind of cover, or what's the kind of the synopsis, the overview of kind of day two in terms of what will be covered on the weekend?
Yeah, well, the big thing about both day one and day two, even though they're both completely different subject matter, the biggest takeaway isn't just the technical nuances. It's the unique, never before done. I've done many programs in this style based on these principles, but this is unique programming. I've never applied this particular program into anything before, and it's absolutely some of the best programming I've ever done. And I'm probably known for my programming more than anything else. That kind of weird natural proclivity towards applied mathematics, and spotting patterns and things like that, and being able to manipulate patterns in order to create outcomes is the thing that I'm probably most known for. And this is honestly some of the best programming work on both day one and day two that I've ever done. So beyond the technical side of things, you're walking away with literally years worth of comfort zone expansion based programming. That doesn't even make any sense, me just saying it, but it's essentially one program that evolves seamlessly as time goes on, by manipulating the numbers in such a way as to allow that to happen, so that essentially what you end up doing is building a wider and wider and wider base, right? Because if you think about displaying your optimal strength, everybody's in a hurry to do that. But displaying that optimal strength requires that you're moving in a pyramid pattern from a wider base towards a narrower peak, where volume and intensity share that inverse relationship. Whereas when the volume's at its highest, the intensity is at its lowest. The proximity to failure is also at its lowest. And you're becoming increasingly more proximal to failure, increasingly higher in intensity, increasingly lower in volume and frequency, as you come towards, ideally what should culminate in the highest intensity possible, lowest frequency, lowest volume possible, and closest proximity to failure possible. A 1 rep max, 1 rep on a platform or in the gym, right? That's a powerlifting cycle, right? And the commonality among the best strength cycles or periodization based programs is they share many things in common, but the one thing they share most in common that comes up most prolifically and seems to have the biggest impact on the outcome is the need for a significant period of the training cycle to take place in relative comfort, and for almost all of it to be somewhat distal to failure. In other words, for almost all of it, if not all of it, except the competition itself, being sub-maximal to a degree. And that degree will vary in direct proportion to the proximity to the peak, right? So what I essentially did with the whole comfort zone expansion methodology is to take that well-known giant shoulder, so to speak, of effective strength training, stand on it and evolve it to what I see personally as the next logical step for perpetuating progress, right? It can be manipulated for fast progress, but it can also be manipulated for perpetual progress, which means progressing over, well, forever, but in reality, as long a period of time as you can humanly, configure, right? And what that centers around is the base. It's focusing on the base as opposed to the peak, right? Because the wider you make the base of a pyramid, the higher the peak automatically becomes. Because the peak can't really be it's directly proportional to the width of the base. Otherwise, it starts to become structurally, it becomes something else after a while. It's not a pyramid after a while, and the more narrower that gets, it starts to become a column, so to speak. So if you want the peak to be as high as possible, the very best thing you can do programmatically is to not even care that it even exists and just focus on expanding that base and expanding that base and expanding that base further and further, right? And yes, because if you improve if you lower the RPE of any given percentage of 1 rep maximum, you will have effectively lowered them all, including 100%, right? But obviously your proximity to that maximum in terms of where you're training is going to be directly proportional to the impact of the immediate effect you're going to have on it. So what that means is, say I'm training in the 60% range and I make significant improvement, or I significantly lower the RPE and increase the proximity of failure, like, further away, it's more distal in that range. I will more profoundly impact 10% up and 10% down from that. So maybe 50% gets affected massively, 70% performance gets affected massively. And then as they become more and more separated, the effect is less and less pronounced. So you might say, well, then that doesn't have as big an impact on 100% as what I wanted to. No, but you're missing the point. The point is it's easier to create progress here. It's easier to continue. Now, I'm not saying 60% where you do it. You can do it anywhere. But the point is, wherever you are, configure the maths to expand the comfort zone as much as possible, making that get easier for as long as possible until what used to represent 100 represents less and less and less over time, right? So you're going to have an impact on 100 no matter where you're creating the improvement. If you've created the improvement anywhere, you create it everywhere. So you're going to have an impact of some degree. If you continue to have that impact, that effect on 100 stretches and stretches and stretches until eventually you've enveloped it. And 100, your new 100 is way up here somewhere, right? So it's some of the best kind of work I've ever done in that regard for both the press and 2 basic exercises for the legs that are technically nuanced, done in a slightly different way, like variations, a variation of a squat, a variation of a deadlift. And the program is, if I do say so myself, the number play is beautiful. And what it does is it creates really, really actually fast progress for a really long period of time within the loading parameters and volumes that are conducive to muscle growth. I've field tested this Pillars of Power program to the max. And some of those results are going to be coming out towards the end of the year after these workshops are over. And it's just mind-blowing how much people's legs are exploding, not just with muscle, but with performance in terms of vertical jump increase, standing broad jump increase, shaving several hundredths of a second off 40-yard dashes, things like that, as well as just a complete metamorphic change in what way the lower body looks and the whole posterior chain. And there's a kettlebell based, again, just a squat and a hinge, a kettlebell based cardio conditioning / fat loss program to complement it's a lower body focus, but the fat loss is going to be global because that's what it is. That's what fat loss is. However, the muscular focus and the muscular hypertrophy focus from both the kettlebells and the barbell based hypertrophy program is going to be very localized to the lower body and the posterior chain. It's essentially an athletic and aesthetic transformation of the lower body and the posterior chain with a very, very minimalist approach to exercise selection, a very, very minimalist approach to time in the gym and frequency of training. And it's just so simple. But the number play that sits behind that allows this simplicity to work so well for such a long period of time is really what people are paying for in that regard. So it's going to be fun.
And do you think, I mean, I know people have the potential, have the option to attend one day or the other or both. I mean, are you finding at the moment that more people are signing up for the whole weekend, or are people opting for one or the other? Or do you think both days will complement each other and kind of fit together and sort of there's a synergy between both days? I mean, what would your recommendation be? I mean, we've obviously signed up for both days because we're flying over from England, you know what I mean? So it's kind of obviously makes sense to come for the whole weekend, you know what I mean? Yeah, but what are you finding people are doing?
Well, it's interesting because when we first put it together, I kind of had a bet with the people. I kind of had a bet with the people who were and who work for me with the A12 and different things, that it would be a mostly male attendance in day one and a mostly female attendance in day two, simply because of the very, very stark, observable, consistently observable differences in what the two genders of the average gym goer tend to select predominantly when you see it in gyms. You see a lot of men focusing more on upper body. You see a lot of women focusing more on everything but the upper body and lower body and cardio and things like that. It's turned out to be not that at all. I soundly lost my bet in that regard. It is everybody going to both days. It's almost nobody going to one day. There is a few people who have selected one or the other, but it's literally only a few. It's packed, and it's everyone, and it's both days. And I think that speaks to the nature of what it actually is, because if you read between the lines, it's not just a kettlebell press day and a lower body power bodybuilding, functional bodybuilding day. What it actually is learning how to program and build muscle and strength for the upper body, and learning how to program and build muscle and strength for the lower body, and learning how to program for cardiovascular, aerobic and anaerobic gains and fat loss. So it's essentially a body transformation weekend as well, rolled into one. It's a results producing thing. And even if, I've always said this, the fitness industry, everything everyone does in the fitness industry is about body transformation. Whether or not you do it like the A12 or not, whether or not it's like take a picture, 12 weeks later take another picture, whether there's no pictures, whether nobody talks about building muscle and it's all about mobility, or it's all about gaining more strength to play with your children, or form over function or function over form, or a million different things, kettlebells, mace bells, barbells, whatever, right? If you're going into a gym, if somebody's paying you money and you're a fitness professional and you're going into a gym to train them with resistance or even with cardio equipment or manipulate their diet, literally the only thing that you're trying to do is build muscle and strength and lose body fat with all of those interventions. Because whether it's for a before and after picture or a sporting performance or playing with the kids or looking better on the beach or whatever the goal is, or being more mobile or being more vital or feeling younger, it all is the end result of a body transformation, right? Because when you build muscle and lose fat and get stronger and become fitter, you have transformed yourself, right? So if you're doing that no matter what you're doing in the gym. So you may as well cut out the middleman and actually call it what it is. And this, although it's not the A12 and it's actually not related in any way programmatically or exercise selection or anything to the A12, it is a body transformation kind of weekend in a way. You're learning how to become athletically transformed in a few different exercises that stretches over the course of the whole body. And it's going to do so in such a way that strips you of fat and slabs on muscle, upper and lower. So
And do you
it
find,
covers all bases.
I mean, yeah, I mean, can you talk, Paul, because I think that, like you said, when you were 18, 19, 17, 18, 19, getting strong, getting really strong in the bench press, but at that time, didn't really go in a squat rack, probably didn't deadlift very much, didn't know what a good morning was, all those kind of things. And men tend to try to build the upper body purely through it's the old skip leg day type thing, isn't it, and the chicken legs and things. But when you actually do the squats and the deadlifts, there's that kind of the hormonal cascade, whatever you want to call it, the kind of the whole body hormonal release that by Tom Platz and all those guys, when you're squatting heavy, you're building you're going to give yourself more potential to build the upper body and build strength over your whole body as well. So is that kind of on the the Sunday, the pillars of power? It's the old you can't fire a cannon from a canoe, all that sort of stuff. I mean, you need that, you
100%.
need those strong legs, don't you? So that's kind of buying into everything, isn't it?
Oh, 100%, 100%. And there's some very sound reasons why the squat is probably, why the deadlift is arguably the best strength builder, but by a narrow margin versus the squat. But why the squat is probably the overall best exercise for the people who can do it optimally, for both strength and particularly for muscle. And while it is probably undoubtedly the number one muscle building exercise that you can do with a barbell for most people of normal functionality, let's say, it allows for an unprecedented, there's a number of reasons, right? Obviously you're using some of the biggest muscle groups in the body, right? So the implications of that is you're going to be able to use heavier weight. The implications of that is, relatively speaking, the same level of muscle stimulus for the musculature involved in the squat. I'm pulling this out of thin air, but let's say we create, and it doesn't work this way, but just for people to understand, let's say we create a 30% stimulus in the chest, of what the total potential for stimulus is for this individual. Doesn't exactly work this way, but just to make it simple. And then we do the same thing, but for the musculature involved in the squat. Well, there's so many muscles there for a start, and they're all so big compared to the pecs alone. Let's say we just created that 30% with like flies or something like that, that's as isolatory as you can be in the real world. Not only is there going to be a greater gross muscle stimulus and hormonal reaction to that, but there's also going to be a greater relative reaction as well. And one of the reasons for that is the unprecedented amount of structural support and therefore interset rest that is available on the barbell back squat versus basically anything else, right? What I'm talking about is it's the barbell is resting across your entire skeleton, save the cervical spine and the cranium, right? Which would be odd. But it's resting right across your upper back, which then places it as close as can be reasonably expected to your center of gravity, and also stacks it over virtually every bone in your body, which is in perfect or near perfect alignment with which to support it. And in between reps, what this allows is for the quadriceps to relax once the knees are locked and the torso is as straight as you can reasonably put it. So in between each rep, your body essentially turns into an organic power rack, and allows a degree of muscular recovery to happen in between those reps, which therefore propagates the ability to do a higher volume in any one set with any given percentage of one rep max, except obviously 100%, right? So every percentage that's sub 100% on the back squat, with the correct technique, you're going to be able to do a significantly higher volume in any one set relative to that percentage of max than what you would be on a bench press or virtually any other exercise, because the structural support allows the prime movers to recover to a certain degree in between sets. Now, obviously, you're accumulating discomfort, you're accumulating pressure on the upper back. The postural muscles are starting to fatigue more because they asymmetrically have to hold everything in place. Cardiovascular, you're starting to run out of energy. Your muscles are starting to get starved of oxygen. It's very, very painful. So psychologically and emotionally, you're being crushed, right? But the limit of this is very much like the guy you were talking about earlier who ran 105 Ironman back to back. It becomes a product of the mind as much as it does the body, because the structural rest, the big thing about squats, the son of a bitch about them, is that there's almost always one more. There's almost always one more in a barbell back squat. There's almost always one more. It's a question of whether or not you want it or not. And learning how to do that is one of the most powerful technical things that you can learn in a back squat. And then learning how to take advantage of that phenomenon programmatically is enormous in terms of how fast you can propagate progress for the lower body and have that hormonally spill over into everything, and have that in a residual tension sense spill over into everything. And here's the beautiful synergy of these 2 days. The kettlebell is the only implement that allows you to do something very similar for the upper body. Right? Because the different versions of that rack position, right? You'll both know this better than most people listening. It doesn't so much become a set of whatever the number is. It becomes that number of sets of 1, right? Because you are utilizing interset recovery in such a way that the prime movers are recovering just enough to be able to push you beyond where you would if it was continuous tension style. And that rising tide raises all ships, because you're able to, you dare to stand too close to the sun. But in this case, you've got your sunglasses on. You're in some way immunized against the central nervous system threat response and subsequent burnout neurologically of doing too many hard reps at a high percentage of max, because they're heavy, but they're not as hard as what they should be relative to how heavy they are. They're not as hard as they should be relative to how heavy they are. And that allows you to do more of them. So relative to what it is you're doing, they're not 85% or whatever it is, 80%, 70%. They're lower, right? And then by the very fact that you're able to, so that would then implicate that this version of a press has a higher poundage potential immediately. And that, of course, is right. But what's more productive than that, again, what's even more special than that, again, is it allows you to raise what that already enhanced ceiling is further and further, because you're able to do such a high volume of training at a relatively high percentage of 1 rep max relative to whatever that volume is, right? Now, that doesn't mean you're training at a high percentage of 1 rep max, or it might. But what I said was, and it's subtly different, and I want people to hear this, is you're able to train at a much higher volume relative to whatever that percentage of 1 rep max is, be that a low percentage, a moderate, or a high. And in other words, you're going to be able to progress faster because you can do more with more. And it's how the technique fits what you can do with the programming. It's a beautiful symmetry. They both feed into each other. I can't program for a purely hard style press in the same manner as I can program for an optimal press that I have you 2 guys doing. I can't do it. It's not the same thing. But in creating this faster progress with heavier weights in the press that I teach, it'll push every other ship, including that hard style press, including that GS press, including every shade of gray in between those 2 continuums, or on that continuum between those 2 polar extremes, up faster.
It's really interesting what you say, because I mean, I'm obviously I'm a considerable way behind Pete on the pressing, but the way you sort of program,
That's because your beard isn't long enough, mate.
But you know, the way you program that, I think like a couple of sessions ago, it might have been, say, 5 sets of 3. And then, like you say, and you think, you look at it and you think, it's going to be quite tough, but you manage it. And then the next time you go to it, it's like maybe 5 sets of 4, and you can do it. It doesn't seem that, I suppose, the RPE of the set, adding that extra 1, your mind almost just switches, doesn't it? Because you think, if you're doing 3, you expect the last one to be hard, but when you do 4, you kind of expect the last one to be hard, but the first 2 are like really comfortable, because it's just the way you kind of, I suppose, in your mind. And then when you go from 4 to 5, it's the same thing, isn't it? You think, well, I just did 4, it's only 1 more, and then you can kind of, you can do it.
Yeah. Well, you see,
Yeah.
there's what, well, a couple of the things that I'm going to actually change about you guys is subtle transitions from the rack to the press, just small subtleties, and small subtleties of emphasis of where your body is at certain points along that press and stroke distance. It'll be like, whoa, just like instantly should feel easier, and one of the reasons there is one of the reasons why it's easier to make linear upward progress. Well, there's loads of different programmatic things that I do with you guys, but what you're describing there is a simple linear progression, which does take place, right? And there's a reason why it's easier to do that with this type of press. There's several reasons, but one of them is, just like that back squat, you've turned your body into an organic power rack when you utilize these techniques correctly. So it's harder to add in a continuous tension environment. It's harder to add another rep to what was a relatively high RPE set than it is to add another set. Right? And if you're configuring your technique and the programming in such a way that the next rep is more comparable, or at least almost a hybrid between adding a rep and adding a set, it becomes way more doable and way more programmable and way more progressible, and opens up a 3-dimensional option with which to play with the numbers, because it just opens it up. It's like, whoa. So now I'm not only playing with volume, intensity, I'm also playing with density, with interset rest, with so many things. And the more weapons you have and the better you know how to use them, the easier the war is to win.
And I'm really glad we're having this conversation today, because I think this weekend I've got to do 10 sets of 10 back squats that you programmed.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And like you say, I've got to try and, like that you say, that interset rest.
Oh, get it.
But the only problem is, the videos, if they're over a minute, I can't send them to you. So I'm going to have to chop it in half. But I have the first 5 reps and the second 5 reps. But yeah, it's because you can, like I say, 2, 3, 4 big breaths, big breath in at the top, brace, and do it.
Well, the old Randall J. Straussen super squats, the famous 20 rep squat routine that added like tons of muscle to people, which also came hand in hand with drinking a gallon of milk a day, I believe. Which is going to add muscle no matter what you're doing, and body weight anyway as well. But one of the things that it stipulated, which was so like, oh, what are you talking about, is take your 10 rep max and do 20 with it, right? Now, when I first read that, I was like, oh, you're insane. Like, what are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. Why don't I take these wings that I don't have and fly out the window? It's like, it doesn't make any sense. So how many weeks later? No, just tomorrow. No, you see, it doesn't work that way. You don't do 10 reps one day and then 20 the next. But of course, I was missing the nuance. That book's 30 years old. I was missing the nuance that it was basing your 10 rep max off a continuous tension squat 10 rep max that would have been common in bodybuilding circles that you see Ronnie Coleman and stuff doing, where it's like the knees don't fully lock out. He's going below parallel. He's going more than 3/4 of the way up, but he doesn't lock the knees out. He comes back down. It's like pistons, boom, 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 fatigue and big muscle groups, ironically, will probably build up faster in a squat like that than it would in a bench press, right? Because you're just gassing it, it's coming out your ears, right? And so, so you're going to have a 10 rep max there. There's going to be a rep where you can't get 11 and it's very dangerous. So you just lock your legs out though. Don't panic. Take in more breaths. Lock your knees out. Let your quadriceps relax, right? Let all those fatigue metabolites, all the inorganic phosphate ions and the hydrogen ions all dissipate. Let the ATP resynthesize, right? Let it all happen somewhat to enough of a degree to take a big breath, repressurize intra-abdominal pressure, bend your knees and go back down. And you'll find you'll come up. And the RPE will actually be lower than your 10th rep was. Not as low as your first, but low enough to do another and another and another. And like that, now that's a baptism of fire. I don't recommend that programmatically, but it makes a very powerful point that if it's possible to gain interset rest, you can transform an exercise from being very productive to being almost God mode productive, right? And until now, there hasn't really been an option to do that with the upper body, but we're going to explore it in this day 1 and again day 2 for the lower body, but a much lesser known way to do it for the upper body in day 1. And you know, there's mastering the hard style rack, there's mastering the GS rack, and then there is realizing what they both are missing. Same for the technique of the actual press itself, and inserting that in there, because there's lots of different rack positions that are more appropriate depending on the set, depending on the relative load, and depending at what point in the set you're at as well. You know, there should be transitions between these. It's going to be very interesting.
This is making so much sense. So what you've just been saying there all the way through, what I wanted to say was you mentioned about Sean, who we had on last week doing the 105 and all that. And we asked him about that and we said, is it more mental or more physical? He said it's 100% mental and 100% physical. He basically just said, it wasn't even him who said that. It was another endurance athlete who he nicked it off, but I can't remember who it was. But that makes sense here because so hard style, I'd say, and I'm not picking on a style or anything. I'm just saying you get muscle fatigue quicker, which is when people try and then go faster to complete the set, and then you just gas out, right? Or you muscle fatigue, and then you just can't go anymore, which is what used to happen to me. So I just try and get them done as fast as possible. But now that it's heavier, but in a more kind of interset rest, I end up, I can do the first few reps and they feel great, but then the rack position changes slightly because I'm like, right, I need to relax more. This is exactly what you've just been saying, and it's brilliant. I relax more. And then it gets to a point when actually I can wait like 10 seconds and then it'll go again. But then it gets to a point when I'm like, right, I can't do it after 10 seconds. So I'll wait like 15 or 20. And then I'm like, do you know what? I might get one more. It's not I don't get muscle fatigue first. I gas out first, if that makes sense. So actually I could do, if I could just like rest my heart, I'd be able, like my muscles can go for longer. And I've been eating more as well as a result because everything's got heavier. So it's like,
yes.
All making sense.
Well, there's small. I've noticed that with you. I'm going into coach mode here now. Even though this is like a public podcast, but there's subtle things I'm going to change about your rack that'll make an enormous difference. And you know, it's very, very hard to convey it verbally. You have to kind of feel it, and to have real-time feedback of you telling me this feels like that feels like this. It's almost impossible to do via voicemails and this and that. It's like, I almost need to see it as well, because sometimes your perception of it, because you've no experience of the new thing, might not be right. So I need to see in real time where you're at with it. But subtle changes and subtle shifts and subtle evolutions as a set goes on. Things that I learned when I was doing very high rep sets with what could be perceived as very heavy weights. Like, I don't know, 40 reps with the 40 kilos with one arm. As you'll notice, that wasn't a 40 rep max. I just stopped at 40 for the aesthetic of it. I don't actually know how far I could have went. All I can actually tell you is that the 40th rep didn't feel significantly harder than the first. So I don't know. To this day, I could still be pressing it.
Imagine that.
Intravenously set up with big tubes.
That would be brilliant. It's like, oh, we've got Paul back on the podcast after 2.5 years.
Hellboy. Here somewhere. You know, but no, it's the thing about hard style is there's a lot of benefits to continuous tension pressing in that manner. And there's also benefits to the way GS does it. And the way I do it is not simply a hybridization of the two. It's a hybridization of the two where it makes sense to hybridize. And then it's an additive of things that neither do. That I believe have been battle tested to be required. So another way to look at it is there's a couple of ways to get the hybridization of hard style and GS style right, but there's 100 ways to get it wrong. It's like baking a cake, right? We could have all three of us could have the exact same ingredients, right? But if we don't add the right amounts at the right time, we end up with 3 different cakes that taste 3 different ways, right? And, you know, if you're baking cakes for 30 years and you only have these 2 ingredients that you realize produce the best result when added in certain ratios, at some point you start experimenting yourself with other ingredients to see does it improve the taste further. And that's what I've done with this press. Does that make any sense? It's getting the right ratio of hard style to GS in the right places, right? Like you know, for example, like hard style pressing gets inhibited massively by a buildup of fatigue. You can program in a way that becomes advantageous because there's advantages to continuous tension, fatigue metabolite buildups for like hypertrophy. And when you're so efficient in a GS rack and you're sitting like the way you would for a jerk, right? It's gonna reduce the amount of weight that you can lift because the positioning of your forearm, like think about a barbell jerk for a second. Think about an Olympic barbell jerk for a second when you're in a front rack or a front squat rack position, right? It's in that position to deliberately inhibit the ability of the triceps and the deltoids to lift that weight, to keep the lifter honest and to reduce in many ways the beginner tendency to drive with the triceps and the deltoids in the jerk, right? What almost all of the upward force in the jerk should be coming from is a drive from the lower body, right? And what the arms in that position are massively inhibited in terms of their upward force, but they're in the perfect position to quickly throw yourself under and receive a barbell on the second dip, right? Or the split, which is exactly what you want the arms to do. Now, don't get me wrong, Olympic weightlifters still require incredible strict press strength just because of the insanely exaggerated loads that optimal jerk technique is going to put overhead for them. And they still need to stabilize that there with their deltoids and their triceps. They also need near perfect T-spine and shoulder mobility to be able to stack that correctly. Otherwise, it could end up being very ugly and very quickly. But in terms of the actual execution of their sport-specific exercise, the body needs to configure in a way that makes the prime movers do their job best and have the secondary team position to do what they have to do. It's very, very similar with kettlebell jerks versus kettlebell presses, right? So a lot of hard style pressers are losing out big time because they're doing things in a manner that's reducing poundage potential relative to what the exercise is. It's not a jerk. It's not a long cycle clean and jerk. It's a press, right? Especially if we're talking about heavy presses. But there's things on the fatigue end of the table that hardstyle's missing out on massively as well. And you know, it's very, very interesting tying these two things together in a way that makes it optimal. You know,
Just what you just said there,
very, very interesting for people.
Just made me think the advice you gave me the other week on the log, you know, and the way you just had your arms there, and you sent me a video to watch, and the way you said there about having, so they talk about getting the handles of the log are kind of vertical, you know, and you're here, and then you dip and you go up, and it's literally, and like you say, you're not actually in an advantageous position to press from there, but it does kind of go up and then lock. And I did it a couple of days ago, and I watched the video back that I sent you, and these handles are kind of vertical, and looks really awkward here, but like you say, you're saving the triceps are pretty much shut off in that position, and you're not using any muscular tension to hold it there, and then you're just dipping and driving, aren't you? So it all
everything should be optimized relative to what the actual thing is you're doing, you know. And the problem is when you're trying to apply apples to oranges, the same principles, it goes askew. But it's not to say that there's nothing to learn from this side, from that side, and knowing where to put it together. But if you connect the wrong hardstyle techniques to the wrong GS ones, and if you connect even the right ones in the wrong ratios, you're going to end up with a suboptimal result that might actually be worse than either, you know. And then you get the wrong idea of, the man who chases two hares catches neither. I'm not doing that anymore. Yes, that's true. But the difference here is you're not chasing two hares. You're creating your own one, who's the fastest hare in the West. Do you know what I mean? So
that famous saying.
Whoever that is. Captain Bucky O'Hare.
I'll tell you what. I've sent you a few things on this over the time, but it was just quite funny. I put a video up once. It might have been on TikTok or so. I don't even use TikTok anymore. But anyway, I might have posted it on there, and someone commented on it saying, like, that weight is way too heavy for you. It reminds me, actually, you had a YouTube video ages ago.
Yeah, I'm lifting it.
You had a YouTube video ages ago where you put like 70 kilos above your head or something, and you did it twice. And someone said that weight's too heavy for you, and you were like, well, it's not, because it's, look. But someone said that to me, and I was like, well, they said it's too heavy for you for the exercise you do, and you're not using your shoulder properly and all that. And I was like, I'm not meant to be. I'm using my body to lift
the exercise I'm doing.
Yeah, I was like, I'm using it. It's an exercise. No, I'm not trying to build anything and all that. I'm trying to build strength. And then they said, oh, fair play to you. I couldn't even press that once. And I'm like, shut up. It was hilarious.
Yeah. You know, here's something that I learned a long, long time ago that's blatantly obvious that I'm sure you already know. The vast majority of people, the internet's a big place. It's potentially the whole world, you know, and the vast majority of people, to varying degrees, either know or don't know what they're looking at, right? And then we all shine everything that we see, especially if it's new, through the bias of whatever our particular dogma is, right? You know, and that stems to, it's the way we're designed to actually function as a species. It's natural. We all do it, right? It has its roots, you know, very, very deeply rooted in our ability to survive, to, you know, group together with people who we have things in common with, and to have our tribe, and our tribe versus your tribe, our clan versus your clan, to talk about it in a Celtic terminology. And, you know, down to the tiniest things, people will argue over the tiniest things, let alone something that seems almost sacrilegious to them, because you're getting so much better so fast. And it is similar, it's so similar to what it is that they do, that they almost have to find the differences in order to point at it and go, well, that's different. It's like, I know, but guess what? The rising tide raises all ships. I've become so much better at this style of pressing that I'm way better at any style of pressing than I ever was before. No matter what way I want to do it, doubles, singles, this way, that way, bottoms up, I will beat my personal records right across the board. When's the last time your max improved? And by how much was it? Most people don't get better. That's the elephant in the room. Most people train for years and spin their wheels.
Yeah.
And maybe make modest progress over the course of 10 years. And it's not acceptable. You know, it's not acceptable relative to the potential that each one of us has. I'm of the frame of mind that almost every man, even smaller men, have the genetic ability to press the 48 kilo base kettlebell. They've got it.
I wouldn't disagree with that, because when you said, do you want to go for the beast tamer? I was like, what? What? No chance. I'm an old man and all that sort of stuff. But because I think it's funny, because you see, like you're right. And I see you post it when you're asking people for, like, to train online and stuff like that. And you say, when was the last time your max increased? And they might have increased once, possibly like twice over the last 10 years, but done it once and then not being able to replicate it because it was a full moon, and the moon was in Uranus and all that sort of stuff, right? So, like, you know, on a day it might just go, and then every other day it doesn't. So there was that, but also it takes me back. Was it Eddie you were talking about? Your 70-year-old guy. It takes me back to that, because even when you said that, then I was like, I thought about this, because I was like, there was no internet. You were in a gym. You thought you were the bollocks. And this guy was like, you're not. And you can't do that online, because they just go, yeah, but it doesn't matter, because all these other people agree with me. You were in a gym where it was like, everyone was like, no.
Or those weights are fake. This is just for publicity.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. I knew everything was real because I could walk up and touch it. And go, oh, that was 160 kilos and he really is 70. Do you know? You know, it's like, the internet's a strange place. You have to take it with a pinch of salt.
I was going to say, Paul, do you think there's a weight? You mentioned there that all, you know, or the vast majority of men with the right training for long enough, you know, would be able to press the 48. In terms of, like, women who are listening, pressing, would that equate to, like, obviously you do the Beast Tamer is 48, the Iron Maiden is 24. Would that be the same kind of thing for most women? You think with the right training for long enough, they could press a 24? Or do you think that there's more variables within female lifters and strength? I don't know. I'm just asking the question, you know?
Yeah, there is. Well, for a start, I think the Iron Maiden is slightly misrepresentative of female potential relative to what the Beast Tamer is to men, but it's a strange one because it kind of has to be, in that there's a deficit. There's a specific deficit, all other things being equal, between a male and a female equivalent of the same individual. Let's say a perfect clone, male, female. Paul Mcllroy, Paula Mcllroy, like everything, lifestyle. Maybe she doesn't have a ginger beard. Maybe she does. You know, but it's the female equivalent of me, the female equivalent of James, the female equivalent of anyone, right? There will be differences that are irrefutable, right? Multiple. And when it comes to strength specifically, there will be a disproportionate distribution of strength between the lower and upper body, right? So the 24 kilo pistol is much easier for an athletic woman to achieve than a 48 kilo pistol is for a man. And I think the 48 in general is probably still a bit more difficult, relatively speaking, for men than the 24 is for the woman, right across the three. But there is a relative, all other things being equal, there is a relative difference in the upper body, right? So if you made it a 32, which would probably be closer, there would be much less women because of the upper body requirements, right? But I do believe that a 24 kilo press, if we're talking about that specifically, is something that almost any, you can't say any, I really want to say any, but it's impossible to say that, but almost any, or at least the vast majority of able-bodied adult women are capable of, with the correct amount of technical coaching and comfort zone expansion programmatically. And it shouldn't be without out of reach for too long either. I actually think there's a very high percentage of women could get to 32 or higher naturally. I actually know a girl who, I don't know her personally, but we're friends on Facebook, and she's a strong first instructor. Her name doesn't spring to mind right now, but I can see her face and I can see her press. And I'm pretty sure she's either pressed the 40 or she's closing in on it. She presses the 36 for a couple.
There's a lady in America called Linda Gomez, who's like
That's
a,
her.
who's a,
That's
like
her.
a, I think she's like a Mexican American who's a
That's her.
she's a grandmother, and I think she trains with Jason Marshall. I think she's pressed.
Yeah.
I think she's pressed the 44.
She has. I was about to say that.
44?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And she's like, she's in a, I want to say she's at least in her 50s, and she's quite short. She's quite, you know, stocky.
She's perfectly built for the press.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's get it straight. She's got broad shoulders and short arms, but still, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Like the male equivalent of that, if she could like wave a magic wand and literally become the exact male equivalent of herself, would probably be, well, you know, 20 kilos higher, maybe 30 kilos higher. You know, potentially a 70 kilo press or a 65 kilo, something like that in the press, right? So it's just that the Beast Tamer and Iron Maiden, which are the same things, exercises, the difficulty of them isn't the same relative to male and female right across the board. A man is kind of roughly even on all three in terms of their potential, and a woman has slightly lower relative potential in the upper body versus what her potential is in the lower body, all other things being equal.
I was going to say, in terms of powerlifting, I mean, I don't follow powerlifting avidly, but I obviously friends with quite a few people on social media who powerlift, and you see results. And I know that for a lot of things, you see the deadlifts are like, you know, I'm talking sort of like natural, you know, raw powerlifting. The deadlifts are really, really impressive. The squats are usually really, really impressive. But then there seems to be a big drop off to the bench press for the female, which is the same thing, isn't it? Whereas the man, the male powerlifters, I know obviously bench is going to be the lowest number of the three, but they're a lot closer, the numbers, than the elite. The elite men and the elite women. The bench is substantially lower than, you know,
and that deficit retains, even though women have can have a higher potential for having an enormous biomechanical advantage on the bench press versus most men, in that all other things being equal, the female version of any human being will be hypermobile and hyper flexible relative to the male, and have shorter arms relative to the male, and have shorter overall limbs and overall body length and height, right? So what that means for the bench press is you can get a higher arch relative to your limb length, and you can have a wider grip relative to your shoulder width, and therefore a much shorter stroke distance and greater leg drive without having to lift your butt off the bench, relative to what is possible for a man with longer limbs, less flexibility, longer legs, so on and so forth. So in other words, men are retaining that absolute and relative gap on the bench press, despite having to lift it over a relatively much larger distance as well. So there is quite a deficit, all other things being equal, in upper body strength between men and women. But that's not to say that there's not women who can bench press more than men. You know, there, you know, or any other lift for that matter. But the male version of any woman will lift more than that woman, and the female version of any male will be more flexible and things like that. So there are certain things that are just the way they are, but yeah, the big thing among people, whether you're male or female, is I honestly think that the standard that most people think is the natural ceiling is just far too low. It's just far too low. What people think they are capable of in general is just far too low. And that's not even just the average person in the street. That's even like what we're told by strength professionals that is possible. You should settle for this percentage gain in this time period. And if you hit this number at this body weight, when you're this gender at this age, you should be happy enough. And after this age, you should start getting weaker and blah, blah, blah. And I'm getting stronger every year. And I'm planning to continue to do that for as long as is humanly possible. And here's the beautiful thing about maths that Peter in particular will enjoy, because I know he is also a numbers head like myself. Exactly. I love those block puzzles that you do, the Rubik's cubes and the 3D ones. It's just incredible. And I know that I was going to be the one who spotted the difference between that. Remember the pattern?
Yeah, of course it was. That's why I put it up. I was like, I'll test him.
That post was just for me. It wasn't for anybody else to see.
No, that was there's the whole world out there, and it was like, no. I should have just tagged you in it.
But anyhow, if you can make the numeric improvement, if the numbers if you can configure your programming in such a way that it creates an expansion, a numeric expansion of your comfort zone, you will get stronger. The kettlebell and the programming don't care what age you are. The kettlebell and the programming don't care what gender you are. The kettlebell and the programming don't care how long your arms are or your legs. If you're able to do the numbers because the numbers are configured in such a way that allows you to be able to do them, then you're actually lifting those weights, then you are stronger. As long as I can manipulate the numbers, I can increase my strength. So it's going to be very interesting to see to what age I can continue to be stronger and stronger and stronger than I was in my 20s. In my this, in my that, because it was somebody actually asked me a question recently about how have you seen your recovery change since you were from your 20s to your 30s to your 40s? And in all honesty, I feel my recovery is getting better because I'm recovering faster. And even if you take recovery time out of it, I'm able to do workouts that I wouldn't even have the ability to complete in order to have the opportunity to recover from. I'm able to do workouts now that when I was in my 20s, I wouldn't even have the ability to complete in order to have the opportunity to recover from. And if you could wave a magic wand and inflict such volume and load on me and force my limbs to do those movements, I would be a basket case for a month, because my muscles weren't remotely in the position to handle those loads or those forces. I'd potentially be badly injured, right? Yet here I am in my mid-40s, and that's just called Tuesday, and it doesn't matter. The next day there's no DOMs. I could do it again if I want to, but I don't. Things like that. That's the opportunity that we have with comfort zone expansion, right? If something works with the most vulnerable and maybe injury-prone sections of our society, it will work with every section. So we're talking about the youngest and the very oldest there, right? And actually, one of the things that's made me better at programming, you can fall into your own hubris and get lost in your own reflections sometimes, especially when other people tell you you're good at things and you know you're good at them. But teaching my children about strength and programming for them to get stronger not only humbled me, it didn't show me what I was good at, it showed me where I wasn't good as a coach, to be honest, in terms of patience, in terms of being able to communicate things to a sub-adult intellect, being able to communicate things in a way that made sense, being able to communicate fatigue and effort in a way that made it doable with an individual who had sub-adult levels of tolerance to such things, and being able to present a comfort zone in a way that is beyond comfortable in such a manner that I wouldn't even have thought of using with an adult. It would have been almost too mild even for me. And then seeing the power of that low frequency, low volume, low RPE work, and what way the math needs to look to increase that in such a way that the weight continues to get heavier, but the RPE doesn't go up in a proportionate sense and remains so distal to maximum that children will do it on a consistent basis and improve from it. If you extrapolate that out to elderly people, it still works with technical adjustments for whatever restrictions there are with the individual, or with whatever restriction there aren't. When you talk about somebody like Eddie, who was elderly but had perfect mobility and movement, you know what I'm saying? All us in the middle have no right to be anything less than getting stronger all the time, because, you know, regardless of your proximity to your prime, I honestly think that prime is relative to how hard you're trying. It's like when a human being doesn't try to improve, your body tries to improve for you up to a certain age, and then it gives up. You know, because you're maybe not doing enough things in modern life to constitute, you know, an upward trajectory of testosterone and, you know, an upward trajectory of ability to be able to recover from things. But if you place yourself in a programmatic environment on a consistent basis, which gives you an excuse and gives your body a reason to continually improve, you will do so. You will do so regardless of how many winters you've seen. Do you know? In fact, almost because of them. Sorry, James. Almost because of them. Because it takes because I've had 30 years worth of opportunity to get stronger. My children are going to have longer than that, because they're starting out younger than me and are being trained far better than I was. I mean, you could chalk up the first 10 years of at least the first 5 or 6 years of my training life to, you know, trial and error and, you know, learning things from magazines and questionable sources, you know. So it's like, you've got, the more time you have to get strong, the stronger you can get. It's not about getting older and trying to not get worse.
I'm just writing that down. Sorry.
That's all right. I've got the potential to take this podcast for another hour here.
Sorry. This always happens with me.
You know, you were talking about no, just because I think we'll get to, I think James was wanting to wrap up there a minute ago. But
yeah,
what I was going to say, right? We're talking about.
This is like the Columbo of podcasts.
You know,
just one more thing, Lieutenant.
One more thing. But we're talking about you take your average woman, get them to press a 24 or whatever. Your average bloke, take that woman and turn them into a man, the male equivalent, and then it goes up there. Now I know you like gorillas. How does that work in the gorilla world? Are they more evenly matched?
No, slightly. Like if you well, here's something very interesting.
I knew this would get him started.
The more archaic the human ancestor, well, apart from a few examples like Australopithecus, where there is very, very stark sexual dimorphism, meaning that there's an enormous size difference between the male and the female of the species. You see that in other animals, but you don't see it as much in hominids. We do have sexual dimorphism. It's particularly prevalent in the silverback gorilla versus female gorillas. There's an enormous difference in strength between a silverback, probably bigger than the average human male versus a human female. Certainly, the female male equivalent of each other anyway. But in most archaic hominids, and even in Homo sapien, the further back in time you go, the hormone levels of women in terms of and we can tell this by morphology of the skeleton, and the effect that androgen has on skeletal proportions. For example, on the hand, right? If the index finger is shorter than the ring finger, it's indicative of being exposed to a lot of fetal testosterone around the 14th week of gestation, right? And it can be prevalent in men and women, right? It can be prevalent in men and women. And in most women, you'll see that the fingers are either perfectly even or that the index finger is actually longer than the ring finger in many cases, right? But with men, there's usually a slight discrepancy, with the ring finger usually being either even or a bit longer than the index finger, right? And then there's also differences on both hands, right? Some people have a different ratio on their right to left, and this has been shown to correlate with a myriad of very, very interesting things in terms of brain function, in terms of, not in terms of IQ, but in terms of intellectual interest, either being more creative or more STEM field related, either being, certain things, and being able to play musical instruments, the type of instruments, things like that, risk taking, all the androgen, testosterone related stuff, athletic performance included, right? And when we go back in time, different structures of the skeleton, and the forehead slants slightly backward, or a predominance of a brow ridge, the width of the face to length of the face ratio. There's certain bone densities and things like that. In other words, the further you go back in time, the smaller the relative, there's a relative shrinkage of the anabolic gap between men and women. That's interesting.
It is.
And it even seems to get smaller and smaller in pre-Homo sapien hominids, apart from certain ones where there's sexual dimorphism, like Australopithecus, like very notable sexual dimorphism. So that's interesting. But with gorillas, it's particularly pronounced, particularly with the silverback. Like when you've got beta males and things like that, there's not an enormous difference in physical strength between the gorilla females and a beta male. But an alpha, like the leg of a silverback, there's an enormous difference in size and strength.
It's great. I could listen to you talk about gorillas all day.
That was Peter's fault. Don't blame me.
That other one, there was a post, we'll not talk about it, but that post you put up about when people say gorillas are vegetarian. I thought that was hilarious, because it's like, they synthesize it all differently. Just leave it at that.
Yeah. Birds can fly as well. There's loads of things we can't do.
Yeah.
Just check that quote, Paul, because I wrote it down. The more time you have to get stronger, the stronger you can get.
Yes.
Perfect. Brilliant. No, I think that's a great, I think that's actually been a really interesting, certainly the way the way we went. And I think that's a real, like the overall message, if you like, at the end of, I suppose, not message of hope, but the message of, that you can keep getting stronger and you can keep making a difference. And I certainly, the difference between the chronological age, the training age, and the biological age, and how much effect and how much autonomy and control we have over a great deal of that is obviously there's genetics genetics play a part in things, but I think that the fact that the way we live can really which is what we speak about a lot, isn't it, Pete? The way that you live now is going to have a big impact on the way you live in 20 years time, and that sort of thing. So that's brilliant. Well, that'll definitely, before we came on, Paul, we said we might end up splitting this into 2 parts again. If we had something,
We're splitting it into 3.
I think we nearly went into
Dan
3.
John are both have a habit of being quite long-winded. It must be the Irish in us. Storytellers.
That's brilliant. I was going to actually say, because Dan John obviously has got his Mass Made Simple program, which I think culminates in 50 reps set with body weight, doesn't it? And I think the quote he says as well, or he said, I've heard him say as well,
Squats, is it?
Yeah, 50 back squats in one continuous set with body weight. Yeah,
that's good. That's a very good standard.
And I've heard him say as well that, the thing with back, that, like you said, back squats, if you stand there, you can almost always do one more. You know what I mean?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Brilliant. So just quickly, just to recap, I mean, we did say at the start, this will be a part 1 and a part 2, and this is the end of part 2. But I will just finish by reminding you of the dates. If you've enjoyed listening to Paul, half as much as me and Pete have been enjoying talking to him and listening to him, and you want to join Paul on one of his 2 workshops coming up, it's the 6th and 7th of April in Belfast. And like I say, Pete and myself will both be at that one. And there's the 15th and 16th of June in Charleston in the US, and we'll put links and things to the information and sign up information on those. And we're gonna, really looking forward to that. Paul, I'm sure, I mean, if people want to follow you and just find out more and see, where are you most active at the moment? Is it Instagram? Is that where you're kind of on social media?
Instagram, Facebook. You can just search my name on Facebook and it'll be somebody looking like me in the profile picture. That'll be it. I'll have a ginger beard, a sort of a passing resemblance to a sort of a upset Conor McGregor. The profile picture looks like a sort of an angry Conor McGregor. And it's the same picture actually on my Instagram, and it's just Paul Mcllroy Amazing 12. What is my Instagram?
Yeah, I think it's Paul Mcllroy Amazing 12. There might be an underscore somewhere, but people tap in your name, you'll come up. They'll be able to find you. No, that's absolutely brilliant once again. So we will speak to we will see you in person, Paul, in about 4 weeks. I think it is 4 or 5 weeks. Yeah.
Can't wait.
That's right, isn't it? It's about,
I don't know. I have no idea.
Something like that.
It's about just over 4 weeks, I think.
Yeah. Brilliant. And Pete, I take it there's no closing remarks from you. We've kind of
I'm just keeping my mouth shut, otherwise we'll be here all day.
Set me off on another tangent.
Brilliant. So guys, just a reminder, please do review us, guys, because we are wanting to give away some Health Oddity merchandise for you. And we will, when we get the reviews coming in, we're going to go through them and we'll read them out on live on the podcast, and then we'll send out some merch to some of you. So give us reviews. Please do share, like, subscribe. Like I say, leave a review if you're watching or listening on a platform that allows you to do so. And if you would like to join Paul Mcllroy in Belfast or in Charleston in the USA, you'll find the links to click on for more information and to sign up. Paul, thank you so much, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure as always.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, guys, we'll see you next week. Well, this is going to be episode 185 and 186. So we'll see you next time for 187. And we'll see you then. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett, and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.